Maybe, I think there was another question maybe buried in there, if you could follow up on that notion of totality, just because I'm not really as up to date probably on all the theoretical ramifications of that term, but obviously when you title it something the totality cantos, you are perhaps provocatively pulling in Pound, sort of doubling down on this Poundian sense of not just cantos, but the poem that includes all of history, and so obviously that there's I think some pretty immediate. I'm aware you're very very conscious of totalitarianism and other resonances of totality, egotism, and patriarchy, and so forth. So when you take it as a positive value, obviously, I just wonder if you could think like where is that map for you, or is there? Do you sense this as being a dangerous polemic to take that stance?
Yes. Well, I think there's so many different vectors that come out of that title. The relation between totality and cantos, and then totality in itself, and cantos in itself. Well, I think a great development of recent times is our ability to rethink totality. After post-structuralist dogma, or has become dogma, there can't be that. We finally be able to think about it again. And I think the only way to get at it is with structure. I'll put on the record that my former teacher, Joshua Clover, his Totality for Kids, I think he puts the important wedge into thinking about it, totality, but I don't think his approach is correct into getting at it through a lyric subject. Like, we need structure to get at totality.
Why do we need structure to get at totality?
Well, I think it's at least got to be, for starters, not a lyric subject, because that's just too confined to my mind. So we need something that is able to get ourselves out of our boundaries, and that's why I like structure. And it comes back to the previous things, that the power of the system can get you beyond what you already know into something new.
Sorry to interrupt, but by the lyric subject, do you mean saying I? Or no?
Well, the I is a trope of the lyric subject, but I don't think necessarily itself. But it usually valorizes a subject position. So whether it's constructed as I or implied, and of course, one never gets completely out of that because one has to write the poem. But I've never been convinced that you have to represent it there, because that's just shutting down so many boundaries. And one thing before we get to that too, I want to make sure to take Brent's question seriously with the relation between totality and cantos. Well, I think Pound opened the imagination, to the poem, including history. But there have been tons of critiques of Pound. My main thing is that his form, it makes it totalitarian or authoritarian plotting points, between the things where he wants to go, and he fills it in. So that's why I invert this in my poem with the non-hierarchical, non-contingent form. So there's not any one canto that is dominant over the other ones. It's all completely in imminent tension with itself. So that's my formal overturn of the cantos as as our baggage of history, and my best attempt to get at something that can construct the context of totality.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Obviously, you still have to make decisions, right? Especially when you I would think when you start each line, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and how it seems to me that language is one of the things influencing what you actually fill in each line with, right? But how do you start?
Let's see. Well, certainly, yeah, language is very important. I like the multivalences of words, what I like to call the ontologies of words, and then using the syntax and inventing new syntaxes to order things. It really has to do with jamming up tons of different layers of conceptual substructures, so that I have this very crazy system that I can then make a cut into. And this is very similar. I get this out of Braxton, really, I think. Or I think of myself when I'm writing as like being in a Braxton performance. There's all this stuff going on. You have all these choices to make and a million things going on in your head, and then you make that cut into that chaos. Usually I build up tons of material around it. From what gets on the page, usually there's 10 times the amount of material that I start with. I usually take a huge amount of material, crush it down to a stanza, and then crush it down to a line. And I like to make my cuts very quick. Like Braxton, he likes to admit error and mistake, just like get a capturing of what the being of the moment is, and you have in mind the entirety of totality and the entirety of the planet for that moment where you make that inscription. So I like capturing the moment, and that's like improvisation. Capture like what is the moment of what I'm feeling, and that's why I go on these 12-hour like writing marathons, so I can just get to a funny space and capture that moment when I'm totally wrecked.
Yeah, I have a question as far as the improvisation, because they have a sort of similar structure of how I make photo, but when I make photo, for example, it's more like an improvisation, not as much as structure. So when I listen to your poems, I see the structure, and in relation to the music, I see a lot of almost kind of static kind of improvisation. But maybe it's because of my poetry too. But I want to talk about improvisation in contrast, or in its synthetic, I don't know, relationship with hyperstructure,
Well, it's a structured improvisation. I can't get to a certain space that I want to unless I have a structure. So, and I think Braxton came to this realization early too. Actually, For Alto came about because he got on stage, tried to do an hour of solo saxophone, just pure improvisation, and after 5 minutes he was repeating his ideas. So he had to invent this system in order to make a 2-album LP of inventive different things. And then he developed that to a whole massive oeuvre. So yeah, I'm similar. I invented a system to get to this space where I couldn't get otherwise.
What you read from the latest books has a really raw, kind of cut up feel, obviously. And sometimes you're going outside of syntax, I feel like, and the system kind of comes, takes priority over the syntax, and over a meter too, because the measure is the words or whatever they're using. But anyway, I thought, it's you can totally see the comparison to Braxton, but I almost feel about your poetry the way I felt about Braxton's music, which was I feel like there's a lot of loops, potential loops in Braxton's music that would be great, to kind of pull out and loop and cut up further and kind of take just maybe one section of it, and develop it further. So I was wondering, do you see? I don't know. How do you see people? How do you envision people interpreting this work that's kind of producing ideas almost outside of syntax, where the meaning's almost musical? How do you see the process of interpretation unfolding?
Well, it has to do with, I'm glad you bring up syntax, because syntax is order. And syntax is not just conventional grammar. We can invent new syntaxes. And I like doing that when I can get, when I'm able to. When I have the right things in my mind to make a new syntax. And I definitely, I think, as regards to production of meaning, that's something I really get out of music, is, as I said, music signifies non-linguistically, at least before we represent it in our minds, by the description. And like I love the feeling of getting overwhelmed by noise music. I want to make a poem that will be similar to that. Or so like syntax and form have a lot to do with what I can try to do to analogously be equal to certain things I like about music. And I got a great experience in my early days at UC Davis where we had a great noise and punk scene and a lot of house shows. We had crazy house shows. I lived in one of the houses where we had a lot of bands come through. And I would set up some shows too with music and poetry, and it was great to just try to make some poetry that would stand up to a noise band. Yeah.
Just following on that last comment, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of discussion so far just about the form of the tones, but to me, what's often striking about this work is that it's got this kind of overloaded signification element. So you feel like you're reading some extremely reduced version of like Jameson's The Valences of the Dialectic, where all of these different theoretical themes from the last, as you say, in this one thing, 2,500 years are kind of coming at you. And so there's a way in which the noise here is very different than the noise that you hear in the scramble of improvisation. It's a kind of scramble of signification in some sense. And it's that kind of overdriven quality of this and privileging of a kind of multiplicity of meanings, which weirdly winds up it's like almost like all the lines sort of mean the same thing at the same time. There's a lot of contradictions in the work, which is again what you're kind of talking about and talking through in that writing there. So I know just a comment about how maybe one would try to interpret this work.
Thank you, David.
Does anybody else have any more questions or comments, or should we give a big round of applause to Brian A?